Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Who Framed Roger Rabbit from 1988. Most of the time when you hear anything about Roger Rabbit when it came out, and probably still to this day, is how did they do that? The technical marvel that this film was. And it still is, considering they didn't use computers. It was all more traditional animated film. I think they probably used more computer effects on Space Jam, and that doesn't look as good as Roger Rabbit, or is as good as Roger Rabbit 2. Its technical marvel sets this film apart to a level that really no film in cinema history has been able to get to like Roger Rabbit has. Certainly we've had CGI characters mixed with live action in live action films and all that, but in terms of hand-drawn 2D animation, the beautiful and spellbinding animation from Richard Williams. And he didn't try to simplify it. He actually wanted it to be more complicated. He wanted the camera to move, and he knew it would be more work, but he wanted it to look as good as it possibly could, to be the ultimate animation live action hybrid almost. Like, he wanted to push this further than anyone had. And you had Robert Zemeckis at the top of his game. You had Spielberg probably being at the height of his 1980s blockbuster producing path. You had all these things kind of coming together. And all that Hollywood history and all the technical Marvel stuff is amazing, and it's something, there's so much detail and rich detail into this film. I don't know how many times I've seen this film, but there's some times where I notice little things in the background that I hadn't noticed before. There's older cartoons I'll suddenly see and rediscover and then see it referenced in this film that I hadn't thought about any of the other times, and that keeps happening. That hasn't stopped happening because there's so much crap in this movie. It is frankly awe-inspiring and amazing, and all of the kind of references and everything like that. But I think one of the things that's most interesting about this film is, if you read anything about this film and any of the reviews at the time, everyone talks about it. As much as the kids will like it, the adults will like it more. It's made for the adults. It's not made for the kids. And I think that's true. I've talked about this before in a deep focus, how it didn't mean as much to me being like, I was about 4 or 5 when this came out. Seeing Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny, I hadn't had that lifelong thing like, oh my god, I never thought I would see Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny on screen together, or, you know, this kind of live action animation hybrid thing. I'd never, it's not like I had that context. But the reason this film is more than just, wow, technically this is a beautiful film, because I think nowadays, especially with special effects, we have a lot of that, and you don't see them kind of permeating the culture the way Roger Rabbit did. And Roger Rabbit is amazing on so many crazy levels. It is like the difference between just like hitting a home run and knocking out of the park, and somehow knocking out of the park and that thing becoming a space station and starting a society or something in that weird Twilight Zone episode or something. It's like unfathomable the amount of stuff that this film gets right and gets to work. The fact that this film works as well as it does is astronomical, and if you read about everything about how this film was made, there's so many ways this could have not worked, so many reasonable ideas they had that could have happened that also would not have worked. The perfect coming together of any film, maybe in Hollywood history, and particularly of Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg's, than I think has ever been made with Roger Rabbit, because it is just mind-boggling how they had so many talented people, and the right talented people. I think it is just amazing what they did with this film. It is just like jaw-dropping, and that can overpower it. But while watching it, how it moves, how it flows, how smartly written it is, how smartly they call back to things, how important something that just feels like, whether it be the hammer that shoots out the glove at one point that just feels like a throwaway gag comes back at the end. The stars gag, certainly. The thing with the will, everything in there, there's so many different layers to it. It's so accessible. It's such an accessible movie, but there's a lot of rich detail into it. I can understand why so many people talk about how this film really got them to take film more seriously, and understand how there's so many layers and how much there is in filmmaking, particularly Hollywood filmmaking. There's so many crazy details and different ways to go about it, and crazy ideas and problem-solving things that you have to solve to make these certain things. And Roger Rabbit has all that in there, but it also works as a narrative film. It also works with emotions. It also works with a really great character like Eddie Valiant, played by Bob Hoskins, who Bob Hoskins probably gave one of the first great performances against a character who isn't there. Him and Christopher Lloyd really due to amazing performances. And if you look at like some of the behind the scenes stuff, it's amazing that their performances cut together as well as they do, because they're not acting against anything. And at that time, there really wasn't anything like that training wise. Now they probably train you with that kind of crap and have an acting coach to explain it and things. Then they didn't. And one of the reasons I think Bob Hoskins and Christopher Lloyd work as well is because they are character actors. And there's a difference between a character actor and a lead really knows how to shine and be the lead, big build star. But Bob Hoskins sort of understood, I think, even though he's on the most of the posters, he's front and center with Roger Rabbit, and he's certainly selling the movie, but nobody, no offense to Bob Hoskins, I love him, but nobody was going to see a movie for him. And I think they were smart enough to understand, they really almost went with Bill Murray or Harrison Ford. There's a million people who seem to have been maybe considered for this. Who knows how true that is, but the ones that seem to have the most validity are like between like Eddie Murphy, which I think might not have worked because of the setting, no offense, Bill Murray, and Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford seems a little obvious considering Spielberg produced it, but Harrison Ford cost too much. And Bill Murray was the one I know they really went for. They couldn't actually reach him, and he regrets it to this day. But I think what Bob Hoskins understood is Bob Hoskins knew how to play it, give Eddie Valiant that kind of like gumshoe attitude, that detective attitude from the 1940s, but not overpower and be making it kind of a star vehicle with all these cartoons in it, which I think this film wouldn't work as well with. This almost works better conceptually than it would with a star, and I think that's a really smart move. Same with Christopher Lloyd as Judge Doom. Like, you need a character actor character actors should be able to come in and play a wide range of roles and be almost experimental and know how to act so well you don't even need to worry about them. This focus isn't on them, but they know how to draw the focus to them when you need them to. And I think Christopher Lloyd does that very well. I mean, he's worked with Zemeckis a lot in the 80s, but I think Zemeckis knew how to use an actor like Christopher Lloyd so excellently, because Christopher Lloyd understood Judge Doom shouldn't blink in any of the scenes he's in. He should be, cold and stoic and scary. And it feels like oftentimes with this film, when I'm watching it now especially, it feels like even the way Lord of the Rings did and stuff, that there's so many different shots. And especially in this, I mean, you're going from hand-drawn animation to shots with hand-drawn animation in them to various other shots. It feels like there's almost so many ways this could have completely fallen apart and been a mess, but it works so well, I think, because it has that amazing through line and so much rich history within it. It almost can't fall apart in an interesting way. It's like there's so much there. They know the characters so well, they know the world so well, they know all the references, they know why they're doing everything. There's so much in there. I imagine they must have had an insane map on how to make this film, and I think this film moves in a way that reminds me of things of very watchable, accessible movies like The Wizard of Oz, where you just boom, you are in it and you are going, and it is moving so perpetually. And Roger Rabbit, I think, right when that cartoon, the filming of the cartoon is over, and you have Eddie Valiant come in and say Toons, it is you set up hey, this is a cartoon, this is the world they live in. Oh, it's actually, we film them, it's not animation like we're used to in the real world and so forth. Bob Hoskins immediately sets off he has a distaste for Toons, he's a detective, we get the setting, everything's laid out right there very quickly, very effectively and smartly. You don't actually really need to overbear people with the exposition, which I think Zemeckis around this time with Back to the Future and with Roger Rabbit was very good at doing, naturally having it within the world so you don't have to question it. You shouldn't have to in a movie explain who the president of the United States is. You should just show it on a newspaper, show people that it's real and that's the world they live in, and then keep going. And Zemeckis is very good during this period at visually showing you something, so you don't need to have it explained to you. You sit there and you watch it and you go, okay, that is the world they live in, that makes sense to me, because if I know who the president of the United States is, I don't know why I'm using that example so much right now. I know, this is the most important thing. It's on all the newspapers. It's on the TV news. I get it. This is that world, and I understand it, and I don't need to question it, because Robert Zemeckis just shows it to you in that way. And I think Zemeckis was excellent at doing that in this film. This is maybe, I think, the height of him as a director during the 1980s, because he was so smart at being able to kind of do things that feel like this is a big blockbuster movie. This isn't as deep as an art film or something like that, but in a lot of ways he has so many layers within Roger Rabbit or within Back to the Future that you can go into all these different rabbit holes, and he kind of lets you peek within all of them and understands the weight of all of them, while also understanding that he's making a film for the multiplex. And there's not a lot of directors that can do that. I think Zemeckis often comes off in this period as kind of one of the various many directors that were under the umbrella of Amblin and the big major producer of Steven Spielberg. And I think Steven Spielberg had a lot with how Roger Rabbit happened, certainly without someone who, he's not a lead producer, I think he's like an executive producer. It was an Amblin movie, but he's the one who could go in and be like, hey, I want to get Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse, I want to get Daffy Duck and Donald Duck, I want to get all these characters together in one movie, and he had the weight of Hollywood to do it. You know, Zemeckis at this time had only made the first Back to the Future. This is the film that sort of delayed the other two coming out, and then he shot those back to back. Robert Zemeckis is known for being a tad ambitious, but I think he kind of does it in his own way. Each of the directors that Spielberg kind of worked with, whether it be, you know, Richard Donner or Joe Dante or something, they have this deep love and interesting love of cinema and what cinema can do. Or even, you know, Tobe Hooper. They each were like different kinds of filmmakers, and they had a real love of cinema and love for pushing the boundaries of it. Spielberg is much more known as a technical director than a director with actors, which I kind of, especially for a while this period, which I find interesting because, like, how do you think people have such a connection to his films? You're just sort of like not really reading the whole film. You're reading it on a surface level and missing the under layers to it while complaining it's a surface film when your viewing of it is in fact a very surface thing to do, but whatever. But I think what Zemeckis is so good at, in particularly this film and in the Back to the Future films, is understanding ways to connect to you in a very simple way. Like, you understand Eddie Valiant's brother died and how he hates Toons and how this is a hard thing for him and how he's playing with the iconography of detective films and film noir, and he's playing with all these things and doing different things with them, and you accept that and you watch it and you understand the character very quickly. You understand what makes them tick. You understand what Marty McFly doesn't like being called chicken. You understand what kind of a character he is. And those sound like simple things, but they exude the character so well. They're defining character traits. Like, you understand Eddie Valiant is an alcoholic, that he used to like to laugh, that his life hasn't worked out the way he wants it to, that Dolores is still sort of pining for him and working in a bar across the street from him to sort of still be close to him, even though they're clearly not really going out anymore. Maybe they were, I don't think they were actually married or anything, but I don't really know. But like, you understand all that about that character and you don't need it sat down and explained to you. And Zemeckis does that while not holding down the narrative, while not quieting down for a second. He does that very quickly and then moves on. And, you know, even the things with Roger Rabbit and Jessica Rabbit and their relationship, even the things with Roger Rabbit and how he works and how his relation to the cartoon world, or even the backstory of the fact that Eddie Valiant had a brother who, they were cops, something tragic happened, and the fact that, like, his dad was a clown, so clearly he liked working with Toons because his dad was in vaudeville, and vaudeville was a major influence on what actually became cartoons with Bugs Bunny, the Looney Tunes, and all the goofy stuff you see within this film, including Goofy, who interestingly is referred to a lot but only has like a brief cameo between the Goofy spying charges and how much Roger Rabbit loves Goofy, but like Goofy's not in this that much. This is like one of the movies I like don't almost want to review because there's so much in there, and I feel like I will keep watching it for the rest of my life. I watch it maybe once a year or something. I always have a reason, like, oh, this thing's coming up, but I should check back with Roger Rabbit. It was like Ready Player One's coming out. I should watch Roger Rabbit again. I was working on this video. I should watch Roger Rabbit again. And I noticed this like constant cycle of I keep rewatching this movie because I'm like, there's some meaning in that. There's something there. And I think every time I go back to it, I'm like, oh, what? I never noticed Snow White walking the witch lady to the store like she's like her old grandmother or something. I never noticed, like, why is the reluctant dragon in this movie so much? Like, that's very strange to me. I keep noticing things and picking apart layers and thinking about how they did things. It's just such an amazing fun movie at the same time, and seeing the character of Roger Rabbit, who, you know, is definitely a Tex Avery type of caricature. I don't think he really, and I agree that I've had animation teachers say this, and I think part of almost Chuck Jones's problem with this film is Roger Rabbit isn't that deep of a character, but he almost does exactly what he needs to do within the narrative of the film. I know people love those Roger Rabbit shorts. I know a lot of kids around my age would actually just go to the movies that Roger Rabbit shorts was playing in front of, but he never really took off, because the thing about Who Framed Roger Rabbit is he is the titular character, certainly, but he is not who you see the movie for. You see the movie actually for Bob Hoskins. Obviously, you see it for the cartoons and the concept and all those things. You're not compelled in by Roger Rabbit. You're compelled in by Eddie Valiant, and you follow Eddie Valiant. And an Eddie Valiant film or a story would have made more sense. Not exactly sure why nobody thought of that, but maybe because that doesn't sound as cool. So you kind of have this weird thing with this property where the thing that you really like about it is Eddie Valiant and following his story and his arc. Because Roger Rabbit doesn't really have an arc in this movie. He's Roger Rabbit. He gets upset about his wife, and that turns out she wasn't really doing anything. He's like, oh, cool, I'm still Roger Rabbit. And he doesn't need to. We don't need, not everyone needs like this huge arc, but Eddie Valiant does. So that's why, the character Roger Rabbit wasn't really as compelling as somebody like Bugs Bunny or somebody like, Mickey Mouse or any of the major characters in this film. You have to think of what a character needs to be within a narrative, not what makes every single character compelling to everyone is just ridiculous. And I think they thought of more of like keeping this a million piece jigsaw puzzle together and trying to get it to work, rather than thinking of all the spin-off, shoot-off opportunities they could have with Roger Rabbit, which clearly they realized that character wouldn't, because they like stopped using him and never got that sequel. But I think like this movie doesn't really need a sequel at all, so like please never do that. This film's place within animation and animation history is basically that it came along and reignited the public's love for animation, because if you were older, you hadn't seen an animated film in a long time. If you look at the box office of animated films in the 80s, it was like not good. And although 1988 was a breakout year, and especially in America, with Land Before Time and Oliver and Company coming out, but that actually would happen later in the year. So most people hadn't seen an animated film maybe in over 5 to 10 years in a theater. Like they might have taken their kids to some of the Disney stuff, which still like was getting re-released, some of the older Disney films. They hadn't seen a new animated film in maybe close to 10 years, or some of them probably since they'd been children. And that's very different than the way it is today. And this film was the thing that like brought back animation to the public, and even kind of paved the way for the Disney Renaissance, which would theoretically and technically start the next year in 1989 with The Little Mermaid. And it made people take animation more seriously because they were wowed by animation. And I don't think anything had really done that for the public in a while. And this holds a special place in a lot of animation fans' hearts because it was able to do that, but it was also able to bring back all these characters and reignite and make you go, oh yeah, I remember what I liked about animation. Also going like, how did they do that? Animation had been like cheaper. It had been about product tie-ins and action figures and things like this, but this made people go, oh, I love the gags, I love the fun of animation again, and I love the art form, and it really brought the art form back, and the 90s were a great time for animation. And Roger Rabbit's one of the big proponents of being able to do that. Disney Renaissance was kind of like the beginning of this huge, great period that was unstoppable, but Roger Rabbit kind of like opened the door quite a bit for all of that to come on in and for the public to be ready. It was kind of a rallying cry that animation could do these amazing technical things after a decade, particularly for Disney, although this is a Touchstone film, but like, it was mainly Disney characters in this. They're like, I think there aren't really that many characters that aren't Disney. You have the Harvey cartoons, Jack in the Box, you have Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, you have Coco the Clown, you have Felix the Cat making a small appearance in a couple places. You have certain things like that, but it's mainly a Disney film. Steve Jobs came up with the idea of brand deposit, but this was definitely a brand deposit, but it was also a good movie. Like when I was a kid, I watched this a lot, 1,000,001 times. My younger brother watched this 1,000,001 times. It spoke to my parents and my parents' generation, who could watch this film and think, I love animated films again, and there's a new animated film. Oh yeah, I'll definitely see a new Disney animated film. It definitely did that for them, but it also was able to make everyone who saw it have a positive view on animation and think of animation again at a time when they necessarily weren't, when that wasn't the cool thing to do. This film is good enough to understand how that would have happened when you basically had an animation desert that was going on at the time. And 1988 was a major big year for animation, and I think Roger Rabbit was kind of like the big pinnacle of that, and saying like, not only should you take animation seriously, and animation is coming back, but animation is about to get very exciting in the next couple of decades. This is just going to whet your appetite for all the amazing things that will come up afterwards. There's that level to it, but it's also such a great film. What it's doing with the Chinatown tropes, what it's doing with film noir and detective films, what it's trying to say about even LA history, animation history, segregation, how people actually view animation as a lesser art form is in here also. All of these things are within Roger Rabbit, but is also an entertaining film. You can watch this film and not get any of that, but also you probably did get a lot of that, because that's how well written and well made this film is. I think this is maybe my favorite. It's like kind of, when I think of Robert Zemeckis, I love the Back to the Future films. I love a lot of his filmography, except Forrest Gump, fuck that. But Roger Rabbit, to me, is like this pinnacle, unquestionable, great film. It's probably one of the greatest films of Hollywood history and of filmmaking in general, because they achieved something that no one's even gotten close to doing. Being able to say all these layers, making an entertaining, fun movie, making a film that says all of these things, and maybe Roger Rabbit isn't like the most amazing, crazy, the big marketable character he should have been, or things like that. But to me, it's like the most important thing about the characters within this film is the film that they occupy. And Jessica Rabbit and Eddie Valiant and Roger Rabbit work so well within this film and brought together such an amazing thing. This is a film that is greater than the sum of its parts in such an epic way. It's just like, how did you do all of this so perfectly? It's not only movie magic, it feels like an impossibility, and that's probably why we're still sitting there and wondering about Bumping the Lamp and about how they made it and about how they even got this to work and all the problems they had within it. I can keep reading and reading behind the scenes things about this film because it is an amazing, crazy Hollywood movie that just shouldn't be what it is. It should have fallen off. Maybe they should have had Popeye and Tom and Jerry and Heckle and Jekyll and Mutt and Jeff and all these other characters, which it doesn't, which sort of sucks. But other than that, which is, to me, doesn't even really bother me as much. It bothers me like when I'm not watching the movie. When I'm watching the movie, I'm just so in it, and I love just picking out various characters, and then I'm like, oh cool, the reluctant dragon, even though later I'm like, why the fuck was the reluctant dragon in this so much? I think Who Framed Roger Rabbit will probably be a film that will go down as one of the great masterpieces of Hollywood history, and one of the great masterpieces where live action filmmaking and Hollywood filmmaking respected and gave tribute to the greatness that animation had been at that point. And it is a good way to kind of close the book on a previous generation and a previous history of animation and show you what they had done before. Almost a passing of the torch to show my generation, this is what Looney Tunes were, this is what Mickey Mouse was, this is what it all was before. Now you take this and do your own thing. And I think that's maybe Roger Rabbit's real legacy, is because I think there's more people who understood that there was this rich legacy of animation before them, and it kind of excited you and made you want to go on and do your own thing, while still respecting that this film is a beautiful, amazing masterpiece that can just be watched and rewatched a million times. It's probably the perfect film for home video because you can never get sick of it and still find things within it. I don't know if the magic of this film will ever dissipate to a certain regard, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to watch it the same way, because every time I pick something new and think of a new theory and watch it from a different way. I think what Robert Zemeckis did with Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of the great marvels and amazing things that I've seen from a Hollywood director or any filmmaking entity. And it's one of those films that I just think will always be going through and pouring through and thinking about. When people disregard it or think, oh, it's just a silly movie, or oh, Roger Rabbit, I don't know. I almost think that they're not able to understand the real magic of animation and the real magic of filmmaking and let themselves go and go into sort of the depths and let them go into kind of what filmmaking and what Hollywood can really offer, and how, that kind of magical experience that all that has within it. Roger Rabbit will continue in all of the magic that experience has within it, and the theatrical experience, and what filmmaking and what frames can. And by the way, they animated this mostly on ones. It's just a magical, amazing technical feat, and it's one that I think I will appreciate, and probably filmmaking and cinema history will be able to appreciate for a long time to come. So if you have seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.